Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our very first episode of Pop vs. Culture. I'm Zach Pugh, joined by my special guest host, Mike Dunn.
Hi.
Hi, how's it going? I want to make sure that everyone knows what this show is before we get started with our lovely episode. Today's episode, of course, is Iron Man versus Batman, which is going to be great to talk about. We'll get to that in just a moment. This show consists of us taking pop culture icons from video games, comic books, anime, and movies as well, and pitting them against each other in an all-out brawl to figure out who would win in a true fight. Now, you as the fans decide what we have as a competition. On top of you as the fans decide who wins the overall fight. So you and I, we do nothing but we really just debate about this stuff and kind of talk about what we're going to do. We'll talk about how these characters would do in a fight with meeting each other. And you guys as the fans decide who wins. So we have no really voting on this.
Oh, no voting. Okay.
No voting. So we get to be partial or impartial. I mean, on this section. So the way I want to do this is the way we do this. It's going to be the origins, the timeline, the weapons of the character as well. We'll take some time to talk about these characters, and then we'll kind of debate a little bit after that. So we'll take about a couple minutes to kind of talk about all this together. Okay. So with that being said, Mike, I'm going to hand it over to you for Batman, the good old Dark Knight himself.
Okay, well, Batman was created in 1939 and first appeared in Detective Comics. And so I think we all know Batman's been such a cultural figure for the last 80 years, nearly 80 years. And he was he was a character that was created, and we all know the origin story that his parents were killed in a dark alleyway after seeing Zorro. And I don't think the movie's changed. I think in certain comics they do the origin story, but Zorro has remained pretty much the theme in that. But he has so Batman has been he was someone who was struck by tragedy at such a young age and decided he wanted to be a champion for justice and for vengeance at one point. Batman in the 40s carried a gun. And then we had the Batman doesn't carry a gun in the 70s. So we've gone back and forth with the weapons. But when you talked about weapons, and of course with Batman fighting Iron Man, we would have to talk about the weapons. Oh, yes. And Batman, while he may not have a gun, does have weapons. And so he has an array of weapons at his disposal. He has, of course, the famous Batmobile.
Oh, yeah.
The Bat plane, the Bat helicopter.
Oh, yeah.
I think there was even in the show, in the 60s television show, there was he had shark repellent, which has made its way in the comic books in humorous times. Yeah. But Batman does have an array of an arsenal that he can use at his disposal.
He does. You mentioned something about the character too, with the transition from the 40s onto, I think you said the 70s, where they went anti-gun, like no gun for Batman. The thing I want to mention too is the evolution of the character through kind of the timeline through comics and through the movies as well.
Yeah, and so in Batman, they had serials in the 40s, which I think all of us are really too young to remember.
Yeah.
But the serials in the 40s were very cartoonish. And then in the 60s, they had a television show, which was also cartoonish. However, one of the things the television show did establish is that Batman, it established this rich, very wealthy character, which had already been established, but I think we saw the luxury of Wayne Manor, and we saw just the elaborate wealth that Bruce Wayne had. And so if we hadn't had the 60s Batman, we wouldn't have had the 60s television show where in the comic books followed suit, where it was sort of camp. And then in the 70s we took a turn. We took a more serious turn where Batman, the League of Shadows, the League of Villains came in at this time, and Ra's al Ghul came in. So we started seeing villains that were a little less cartoonish, villains that wanted world destruction but there was some gray areas. So we started seeing gray areas with Batman in the 70s, and he became at that point he became the DC's leading hand-to-hand combatant.
Oh, yeah.
In the 70s, and it really hadn't established that, but because of the competition from Marvel in the 60s, DC used Batman. Batman became one of their main characters in the 70s because he was such a fascinating character.
Yeah, I remember some of the older comics that I've seen. they had the Batman logo on there with DC, so it was like Batman's kind of like cowl, and then they had the DC logo, and you didn't really see that. You even saw that on like Superman comics, and on the other rest of the comics that DC was producing, even some of the Green Lantern Corps, if I remember correctly, later on, were coming out with that logo. It was like he was the epitome of DC at that time.
Well, and we had started a fan base. DC started a fan base in the '60s, and those kids grew up in the '70s, and so the Batman fans wanted a more adult story. And of course, in the '70s, we still had the comic book code of authority. So they had to, and both DC and Marvel were very particular about making sure that content could be in the comics code of authority. So we still had that. So I think we see that progression of Batman through the '70s becoming more of the hand-to-hand combat, and then we see in the '80s with Frank Miller's Dark Knight, The Dark Knight Returns, that's where he really became very dark.
Yes.
And then the movies have been the Michael Keaton. I think you've mentioned.
Yes.
That is your Batman.
Keaton is Batman to me. Michael Keaton, that rendition of him is just, that is the Batman. I would say I remember some of the Adam West stuff, seeing earlier renditions of the character and earlier stuff of the character. I remember seeing those as that was Bruce Wayne. Adam West was Bruce Wayne. But Keaton made Batman and that kind of darkness, and then it just kind of morphed him into that character.
Sure.
So for me, the number one is definitely him.
Oh, yeah.
I think the last is Val Kilmer.
Oh, not George Clooney?
Clooney and Kilmer tie. I think you get a little risky with some of those bat suits. That's all I can mention on air. You know, that's all I can say to the live. So you get a little risky with some of those suits with Clooney as the Batman.
Oh yeah, well.
and the villains, of course. But you talked about the mesh of Ra's al Ghul and stuff like that for the villains. I know when he was implemented as a character, some of your other villains started getting a little bit more creepier. Like I know Joker kind of meshed in, especially with the '90s cartoon, and I know Riddler and all them kind of meshed in as well. It kind of got a little bit more, as you said, darker as a characters.
And over the years, DC has played the Joker as he exists because Batman's there.
Yeah.
And so Joker he is the answer to Batman's goodness, I guess. Batman's vigilanteism. Joker is the flip side of that coin. And I think DC has played that very well because anytime you have a Joker Batman, a multi-arc story, it sells very well. But I think Batman went darker. And there have been, in '92, I believe, my dates may be a little off, but that's when they broke the Batman's back.
And Bane. Yeah, that is.
So we see a physical breaking of Batman, and a mental breaking because leading up to that, he had Bane had broken every villain out of Arkham, and we see this mental breakdown, and then he's able to break the bat. So we see that Batman is human. And so I think that was the whole point of the storyline, to show the humanness of Batman, the humanity. And so I think that was a really interesting story arc for that. So we see that this is a man who physically can be broken. And I think from that point on, we see a different Batman.
I agree with that. Definitely with Batman, you've got this epitome of the character being in sorts of almost unbreakable and godly from the villain's standpoint of, oh my gosh, it's Batman, we need to look out. And then after the Bane scenario, you have people challenging the Bat more. Joker being one of those people for sure. I know there's a few definitely in the comics and a few in some of the cartoon series and even the movies show this, where people were challenging his ability to be able to maintain. So I agree with that. So we've covered timeline, covered a little bit of origins. Of course, everyone knows Batman's origins. Covered some of the weapons. Let's see. Well, what else do we need here? I think I'm gonna take a step real quick and introduce Iron Man.
Okay.
And then we'll get to kind of the general consensus of what we think's gonna happen. Yeah. Origins, obviously, everyone knows Iron Man. 21 years old, Stark takes over Stark Industries. He goes on a trip to Southeast Asia. He's this millionaire that's going over there to try and sell some weaponry and stuff like that, and he's captured by a terrorist group, kind of auctioned off, and he gets shrapnel from the fight that happens for for his capture and all that. And so him and a scientist work together to prevent the shrapnel from taking over his heart, which is initially the prototype to the arc reactor, which you see not only in the comics and stuff like that too, but you see it in the first original Iron Man movie with Robert Downey Jr. You see that. They do a great job in implementing that backstory. I thought that was really, really greatly done. Then, they designed this suit to get out of being captured, and thus is born the Iron Man himself, the Invincible Iron Man. And this suit was generic. Like, you remember the one from the movie that's like, looks terrible, and it has this issue of like, man, you can buy that at a garage sale, This one was pretty much that way, that gray styled. So that was kind of the origins of this character. And, early on, Iron Man doesn't tell anybody that he's, Tony Stark does not tell anybody that he's Iron Man. That doesn't happen until the 90s, if I remember correctly. Probably the early 90s is when it happens. And the timeline for him too, his first comic appearance was March of 1963, in the Tales of Suspense, issue number 39, which later became Captain America. That later became Captain America's full-on comic and his own solo comic. So Iron Man, they tested Iron Man out and gave him his own comic about 1968. So this character's been around since about the early 60s, kind of hinted at what they were going to do. In 68, they did the standard gray armor, and then around, 68, they did the standard gray armor for some of his armors that he was starting to build. So once Iron Man was starting to build stuff. But 63 is when they did the patent red and gold. And you see that kind of progression not only in movies, but in the games and in the comics. That red and gold is like, that's the epitome color of this character. So, we move on to to how the color changes and morphs. And as the character begins to be this pinnacle character in the world, that's the symbol of him, is that red and gold, that fire flame. And of course, Tony Stark, being who Tony Stark is, I gotta have flair. And that's why I chose these colors, not because they, aren't flashy or anything, but that's why I do this. And so, I know that in the early 2010s, I believe it's when Iron Man 3 came out, Marvel Comics announced that Iron Man would be the new figurehead of Marvel, and he's still currently the figurehead, which everyone's like, oh no, what about Peter Parker? But Peter Parker wasn't the Pinnacle anymore. He was not being. Tobey Maguire had those movies. Well, that was after that. So. I
think Robert Downey Jr. was inspired casting.
Oh yeah,
just an amazing casting choice for Iron Man. And so when the movie came out, I think it was the best idea. And we see how Marvel, if we were doing verses on movies,
right.
But we see how Marvel has done an excellent job building on this one character and building a whole cinematic universe. So I think, and Robert Downey Jr. again was just such an inspired choice.
And rumor mill, they're discussing about bringing in the child from Iron Man 3 as the successor to Iron Man, which kind of happens in the comics, which is another progression origin. Tony Stark, after kind of going back and forth, he's like, hey, you can have this. And then he's like, you know what, I want it back now, and now I'll become Iron Man again. And then he gives it away again. And it's not until 2016 where he gives away his mantle for good, and he finds his successor. And that's the recent issue for the franchise, that as you've noticed, the Iron Man franchise is not necessarily being produced as much right now. There's been conflict with the character choices and stuff, but that's a different topic for a completely different day for their comics. We're not reviewing the comics, of course. But coming back from these near deaths, fighting and coming back, going in and out of the character, you see this progression of who he is. Tony Stark himself, thanks to his family traits, an alcoholic.
Yeah,
he's a raging alcoholic. He fights a lot for that. So you get this transition of him too, and you get this real world feel about that this is something that he's suffering from. And he fights with the Avengers. He goes with Guardians of the Galaxy for a few years. There's a bunch of different things that he does. In fact, he goes strictly to be a Guardian of the Galaxy member, and then I think this is about a 5 or 6 year issue, and then all of a sudden he's back with the Avengers, and the Avengers are like, yeah, you can come back, sure. It's not like they're not accepting of it, but they do it anyways because it's Tony Stark.
Well, he seems because he's got the money. So I think that money says a lot.
Gotta remember, we have the battle of the billionaires for this one. So yeah, weapons for me, I chose some generic stuff for him. The 360 vision, obviously, for the helmet. You've got the AI system. You've got this ability to when you put this helmet on, no matter what direction that someone's coming at him, he sees that coming because that AI is spotting that from him coming in. So that's a really cool deal. You know, he's never not able to see what's going on, which is cool. The energy blast, obviously, from the chest, you know, the big beam that comes out, we saw that in Iron Man 2, even though that's Thor's movie out of the 3. We saw that in Iron Man 2, you know, that's the unibeam when he gets the newest element, which actually does happen for the comics, of course, too. Obviously, the repulsor blasts. You got it. If you're going to mention Iron Man, you got to mention the repulsor blast, the little hand. You know, everyone knows what I'm talking about. You know, when he puts his hand up and it makes this beeping noise from the video games and from the movies, and also in the comics it even has that little animation of screeching of like powering up type thing. So you've got to mention the repulsor blasts with an interesting, you know, it's just an interesting freaking battling for him.
Oh yeah.
The thing for me too is the extremist armor. This I have to talk about. You see it in Infinity War. Spoiler alert. Hashtag spoiler alert. If you haven't seen the movie already. You see this in Infinity War. The extremist armor is this ability of nanotech technology that not many people know in the comics. They do. If you read comics, then you know how this came about. But not many people know from just watching the movies what comes from this armor. This armor is nanotech technology. So it fights already against all these other electrical issues, you know, which is something that we'll probably talk about in a little bit. But it's able to heal. Not just the armor, but himself, because he took nanotech technology, and put it in his bloodstream and put it in his bones. He hauled out his own bones to be Iron Man, which I thought was a pretty crazy thing.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, you don't see that, of course, in the movies because it's a little gory. You know, got to keep it kid friendly. And then, of course, the collection of armor. I mean, this man has millions and millions and millions of suits. I mean, think about it. He built Hulkbuster 1, and then when that didn't work anymore, he built Hulkbuster 2. He did the Thor Buster. They're all busters. There's never a non-buster. It's all busters, which I think there's a underlining thing about that. I did like the Galactic Buster. Was pretty cool for me. I don't know if you remember who Galactic is, but he literally built a suit of armor to fight Galactic, and I was like, this is much. We don't need this anymore. This is like he fights everybody, not just Tony Stark. But now Tony's like, I'm going to build the best armor I can build because I'm Tony Stark and I have the money. So that's for me. That's the collection of armor.
Well, and I think, you know, as we talk about weapons, I think one of the important things to note about Batman is the fact with his non-dependence on a gun. And I think they made this so is that he is so smart.
He is.
And I think we see that in the early 90s. They had an arc, or maybe it was mid-90s, I apologize. But there was an arc where he took down, or his ideas, he had written ideas and took down the whole Justice League. You know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about, because they re-edited it and did one of the popular voice actors, not the one that's been doing the original voicing from the Batman animated series, but the recent one that they've been implementing in Killer Joke and all of that. Well, actually, no, Killing Joke was the same guy. The Doomsday ones, the Doomsday cartoon that came out for the movie. They listed, as a spoiler in the movies, they listed him out saying how to defeat each Justice League member. And he knows that.
So I think Batman, you know, when we talk about his brain is one of his most important weapons. And I'm not saying anything against Iron Man. However, Batman is such a strategist.
He is.
And I think we have to, when you talk about weapons, he has weaponized his own brain because he thinks 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And that's been a theme in the comics, at least since the 90s. Since he came back after Bane, he has been just a master strategist.
Exactly. And excuse me, the thing I will say too, where our characters do have besides the money, the characters have some similarities. The origin story, obviously, you know, Tony Stark loses his mother and his father in a tragic accident when he's young. I think that's an underlining thing for a lot of superheroes. Oh yeah. Marvel and DC were like, this thing works, let's just do this. But the other thing too with those characters is that you have this intellectual property for it. Batman has the detective, I'm going to outsmart you and beat you in that way, whereas Tony has I'm smart. I'm a prodigy. This is what I do. So I agree with you there. You know, Batman's for this fight especially, even if they meet mano a mano, which is kind of what we do for this type of show, is meeting on the street. Batman's going to have some way of trying to outsmart Tony.
Yeah,
the difference between the characters that I'm excited to see, and I'm hoping to see what the fans decide and what they vote on, is the transition of how the characters represented for Batman compared to Iron Man. Which, with what I mean by that is the ability that Batman won't kill you. Batman will resist the urge to, except for unless you're Superman, Batman resists the urge to take you out. Tony's kind of like, it happens. So that's my thing too. I'm interested in that, and the surprised you haven't mentioned it yet. But we're gonna get over to the debate now and kind of figure this out. So
I think Batman has this unique ability, and they've really portrayed this of knowing his enemy's weakness.
Yes,
and he's and manipulating that weakness.
True.
And so he's been he's like you said, he brought down Superman. He was able to bring down Wonder Woman. They showed there was an issue where he brought Wonder Woman down, and I think now in the DCU she is the most powerful.
She is currently in the DCU. I will say that she is the most powerful. The other thing that I will say with Batman that I've noticed, and it is a progression of the character because they're not doing it as much as they used to. And I know in the 90s, like late 90s, early 2000s for that cartoon, is kind of my referencing a lot for that because I'm a huge Mark Hamill fan, so I can't help but reference that stuff because Mark Hamill Joker is the best Joker, no matter what anyone says. But the referencing of he would fight them, and the first time he'd fight, it'd be a fight. He would have struggles. He would have his moments where he would win and some moments where he would lose the first fight. But he would come back and do that and be able to fight him again and be like, I have a contingency plan now. This is what I'm going to do. And as you said, that's kind of the evolution of the character.
Yeah.
Whereas from the mid to late 90s, they went from he really just kind of fought you to I'm going to outthink you now. And so the modernization of him for sure, definitely he has contingency plans for everything. So I'm like I said, I'm interested to see kind of where this goes.
Well,
so
and I mean, you mentioned Tony Stark's AI.
Yes.
I think we can't mention Tony Stark's AI without mentioning Batman's Alfred.
Yeah, Alfred is the epitome of it. I agree with you there. Alfred makes this. It's the butler. I mean, you know what I mean. It is the character that is kind of the man behind the curtain.
Exactly.
Which, in my, I'm gonna have to say, reference a movie again. Personal opinion. The Alfred from, I think it's Batman Forever with the female Batgirl and then the Robin that ends up being in,
yes.
I think he's in NCIS Los Angeles now. That Alfred is probably, in my opinion, one of the better Alfreds. I liked Kane's version, but I liked the older gentleman type feel.
Okay.
Of like, this is me. I'm not per se a fan of Justice League's representation. It's a little younger for me.
Think he's a little young?
I think he's a little young because you know the character's young for Alfred.
Yeah,
like, at least you could bring Kane in and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. But let's transition over here for a little bit. Let's go to this debate. Kind of talk a little about the characters.
Okay.
So each character, you know, Batman's driving around in like the Batmobile, or you know, probably in the Batjet. Maybe the Bat Helicopter, or maybe on the Bat Sharks. I don't know. Whichever transition he wants to drive in on.
The Bat skateboard.
Yeah, the Bat skateboard. I think he has a Bat skateboard.
Bat scooter.
It would not shock me if he has a Bat skateboard.
The 60s were a great time.
They were. The motorcycle, I think, is one of my more favorites with the sidecar.
Oh, yeah.
The Robin sidecar that literally made no sense to have at all. It was just like, let's add this and see how it looks. And it was bad. I remember that one because I remember seeing photos of it. So Batman's on the street, meets up with Iron Man. What do you think is happening when these two characters see each other? Is it a flash of money, or is it instant combat and let's see what happens here?
It's, I think Bruce Wayne, he's flashy for a reason because Bruce Wayne is a character to him.
Truth.
Batman is who he is. Bruce Wayne is who he pretends to be.
Yes.
I think Iron Man's not the same. I think Tony Stark is who Tony Stark is.
Yeah.
So I think Tony Stark may be a little more flashy with his money.
Yes.
And odds are he's been drinking. They're meeting on the street.
Odds are he's probably at the bar right up the street. You're right. Yeah. You were talking about contingency plans for Batman. It's just here's a bottle of scotch.
Yeah, exactly.
And just throw that out there. I agree with you there. I think overall, Tony's definitely more flashy, especially after he admitted this is who I am.
Exactly.
You know, when Tony came out and said, "I am Iron Man," that was the epitome of, all right, well, we know who Iron Man is now. Let's go after Iron Man. So I agree with you there. That character is he's definitely more flashy compared to Batman. So it's Batman. You've got Iron Man flying around in Gotham. Apparently, you know, it's definitely Batman's home turf. So I'll have to give him that. You know, so I'm wondering, you know, is it just an immediate fight, or is it a?
Well, I think Batman would want to know who's in Gotham.
I agree with you.
As such a protector of Gotham, I think he's going to want to know who's flying around in this bright colored red and gold suit.
That's definitely not nonchalant at all. Of, who am I? I am Iron Man. You can tell. Yeah, I agree with that. I think Batman's wondering who this is, and Stark's looking at it as, I don't know who you are either. I'm in a city trying to find out who all the baddies are while I'm here, because that's kind of what Stark did in some of the transitions of the character. So I think for sure that goes into a fight. The biggest thing that I noticed, and I have to mention it because we haven't gotten there yet, the EMP debate. The EMP debate is always the biggest thing that I've noticed, and so the EMP debate is the fact of it is that people say, well, all you got to do to beat Iron Man is an EMP. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do is an EMP. For me, you see it have a character representation happen to it. Thor's Thunderbolt. Hawkeye in some of the comics have shot EMP arrows at him. You've seen the ability of all these EMPs hitting him. The suit itself recognizes the EMP and shoots it down because, you know, as we've pointed out, Batman's got an EMP gun to fight with a little bit and try to combat that. So that's the one thing that I've always noticed is that's always the fight. Is, well, if they fought each other, Batman's just got to shoot an EMP at him. With the nanotech, you don't get that, unfortunately.
No.
So that's the little ticker for me. I've noticed that. So we're getting kind of towards that. I gotta ask, final thoughts. Who do you think wins?
You know, I think it's going to be a draw. If I'm going to be honest with you, I think it's going to be a draw because A, Batman's not going to kill. And B, I think that with all the technology that Iron Man has, and now with this new tech, I think Batman can probably fight him to a standstill. But I don't think he's going to win this one because it's too much to overcome technology-wise.
I would love to see a draw as an avid fan of both characters, but I'm a diehard Iron Man fan. I would love to see the draw because I want the two characters to finish that way. I'm leaning a little towards my guy. I gotta say, I'm sorry. I gotta be honest. I'm leaning more towards Tony Stark for the ultra fact of it is that the character himself, he doesn't mind if he kills you. He doesn't mind if he hurts you. And if he thinks you're a threat, and Tony gets angry. We've seen it in the movies. We've seen that happen. Tony loses his temper a lot, and so when he does that, he tends to go a little overboard.
And I think Batman, because he's been with villains, the Joker, one who is unstable as it is, and Bane, who loses his temper a lot,
and steroids.
And Batman has been able to combat that.
I think so too.
And even in the latest, I think the last time Bane, they fought to a standstill.
They did. I think we have a good Superman v. Batman styled ending on our hands where they both are kind of like, you know, we're both good. Why don't we just not fight anymore?
And I don't know what Tony Stark's mother's name is, but if it's Martha,
I don't think it's
then
Martha.
we're going to be okay.
I got to remember that one, but I don't think it was Martha. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our Facebook Live show. This show in general is going to be coming up to a few months now. We're going to have one episode every few months. I'm very excited for you to be a part of this. I'm hoping I can get you on more episodes than just this one. Of course, I got to pull you out of the office a little bit. You as the fans decide who wins this fight and who is going to take this overall debate of who's the better character, whether it's Iron Man or Batman. So you as the fan decides. We'll have those polls up for you as soon as we get this video done and as soon as we get everything posted for you today. Thank you for watching for Pop vs. Culture. Thank you again, Mike, for this. Sure. I want to thank Studio B for giving us this wonderful studio to sit in and do this. Special thanks to David Ellison and Haley Smith for helping us out with our production today. And we'll see you guys on our next show. Remember, you decide. Are you ready to decide who wins? Sweet.
Okay. Good job.